Greetings this beautiful spring morning and welcome to the Global Economic Zones Expo and Convention. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished chair and speakers. Please join me in welcoming with a round of applause our chair, Dr. L.B. Singhal, Development Commissioner, Noida Special Economic Zone, India, and speakers, Mr. Indranil Dasgupta, CEO, ATTIVO Economic Zones, India, Mr. Ranganathan Jagannathan, Deputy General Manager and Team Lead, Business Development, Reliance Model Economic Township Limited, India, Mr. Vijay Kalantri, President, All India Association of Industrial and Vice Chairman, World Trade Center, Mumbai, India, Mr. Rohit Kapur, Managing Director, Dezan, Shira and Associates, India, Dr. Arpita Mukherjee, Professor, ICRIER, India, Mr. Hitender, Mehta, Managing Partner, Central Legum, India, and Shri B.K. Panda, IOFS, Zonal Development Commissioner, Falta Special Economic Zone, India. Our morning session will be centered around promoting investment and trade in economic zones. I now hand over the session to the respected chairperson, Dr. L.B. Singhal.
Thank you so much. Good morning to all of you. In this session, we are going to cover issues like practices and issues, opportunities and challenges in economic zones, promoting investments not limited to promoting exports, effective strategies for attracting investments, need of revised and single window approval systems, foreign investments in manufacturing SEZs. We have 7 speakers with us and we have got 90 minutes time. So what I propose is that I would request each and every speaker to make a presentation or speak for 5 to 7 minutes, and then we take the questions from the house. So this way we will go. I'm not going to give the details about the speakers because the details about the speakers that is already given in this magazine. So I'm sure that you already know about them. So then we will start the session and I would request Mr. Indranil Dasgupta to make a presentation.
Good morning, everybody. So, first session of the day, and I'll speak about financing and risk management of special economic zones in India. As you know, the economic zones started evolving in India from 1965. 1965 to 1980 was the first time when the export processing zones were set up in Kandla and in Santa Cruz. And of course, this was the time when it was characterized by rigid policies, poor infrastructure, poor incentives. 81 to 90 was the development phase when the Noida, Madras, Cochin, Falta, Vizag zones were set up. The EOU scheme was set up. 91 to 99, when the economy started liberalizing, was the consolidation phase of the, I will not call it the SEZ still, but the export processing zones, followed by, in 2000, the first EXIM policy came out and public-private joint projects were announced. In fact, one of our main projects in Tamil Nadu, which I shall also briefly touch upon during the course of the presentation, was conceived during this period in joint venture with TITCO, Tamil Nadu Industrial Development Corporation. In 2005 and 6, the SEZ, during that period, the SEZ Act was notified, the rules notified, and rapid growth happened. Today, SEZs are contributing 25% to India's exports, have had a cumulative export turnover of around $350 billion, contribute around 4% to India's GDP. And as of 2018, the exports are estimated to be about $90 to $100 billion because it was about $50 billion as of September 2018. And exports have been exhibiting a steady growth rate, as you can see from the graph, except for a brief dip in between. Otherwise, exports have been pretty much on the upswing. So what are the challenges facing this division? First, is the policy uncertainty. I think we all know about this, the imposition of MAT, imposition of DDT, the sunset clause, which is going to come into play in 2019-20 and in 2020. And we are not very sure as to how the policy is going to pan out. In fact, more importantly and very troublingly, amongst the private sector, there is a question of government commitment to the SEZ policy after the sunset clause sets in. So will the SEZ policy continue? In what form will it continue? What is the way that the direct tax benefits will pan out? Will there be any significant changes in the indirect tax benefits? Would there be any questions of doing, would there be any facilities provided? Would there be any incentives provided for ease of doing business? So see, there are many challenges in this sector. In addition to that, manufacturing competitiveness of India in general, because at the end of the day, special economic zones are meant for exports, and you can only export if you are manufacturing, if you are competitive on a manufacturing scale. So the manufacturing competitiveness of India in different sectors also needs to be taken a very close look at. In addition to that, there is a global economic slowdown. I think the investment cycle is down in a majority of sectors, except a few. Under these circumstances, the sources of funding for industrial zones and SEZs, domestic, of course, as well as foreign, are equity and debt. In equity, which is unfortunately, this sector continues to be dominated by debt. It's mostly commercial debt from commercial banks, which dominates this sector. I think all of us who are on this stage have already experienced that, and I think all of us have taken loans from banks for developing our special economic zones. Equity is a slow-moving commodity in this sector. Private investors, investment funds, public sector agencies, dedicated government funds, they contribute to domestic equity, whereas foreign equity is independent investors and infrastructure funds. As far as debt is concerned, it's mostly domestic debt. Though ECBs are allowed for SEZs, it is yet to fully take off in this sector because of a number of issues. One basic issue is that the ECBs do not allow substitution of low-cost ECB cannot substitute a high-cost domestic debt as per laws. So that's one of the reasons why ECBs have not taken off in a major way insofar as SEZs are concerned. So financing issues, of course, it's capital intensive, complex. There are multiple stakeholders in this business, starting from landowners to government, to investors, to institutions, etc. And they have long gestation periods. So make no mistake, it's an infrastructure project. And infrastructure is a long gestation period project. Non-bank funding is very rare. We ourselves are experiencing it. It's not that it is not there at all. Sri City has got a lot of non-bank funding, for example, but it's rare. Commercial banks are facing an asset liability mismatch. I think we all know this, and some of it have definitely been contributed to by certain SEZs, unfortunately. Very few NBFIs, non-banking financial institutions, are focusing on infrastructure. My parent company, Shri, is one such NBFI. We do focus on infrastructure, and we are also financing SEZs and economic zones and industrial parks in a major way. Insurance funds, unfortunately, they cannot, as of date, fully contribute to SEZs. They are highly regulated. And most importantly, there is inaccurate and irregular project information. The risk assessment is not a very healthy exercise here. So what are the action points to address the financing issues? We need access to government funds like the NIIF, private investors eligible to invest through ECB channel. As of date, very, very recently, the ECB has, in fact, made a change in the law where private investors, subject to their being recognized in their state country of investment, are allowed to invest through ECBs in different tracks. But that it is yet to take off in a major way. A corporate bond market needs to be developed. The currency and the derivative markets needs to take off. And of course, very, very naturally, we need special courts to hear disputes and fast-track arbitration. This is not necessarily only true for SEZs. This is true across the sector, across financing in India. And so far as risk is concerned, it is basically a question of revenue assessment and cost control. So the risk for project developers are very clear: macroeconomic risk, land aggregation risks. That is the most important risk which is there. The regulatory risks, which is also there, especially in today's scenario. Market and competition related risks, contractual risks, financial risks, technology, resource, and environmental risks. As for financiers, of course, the financial risk which arise from all these risks for project developers. Then the transfer risks. Suppose one project developer wants to exit and another person wants to come in. How do you protect your investment? That's again another question. Of course, the new laws of NCL, of insolvency which have come in protect the interest of bankers to a large extent, and as well as the debt recovery tribunal processes, but still a lot needs to be done. Inconvertibility risks of transfer of foreign currency, refinancing risks. As I said, if you want to substitute your debt with low-cost debt, it becomes very difficult given the environment in the country. You cannot do it using ECBs. You have to do it using some other low-cost debt from the country. Political risks are always there because it's a hot issue. In some states, SEZ is a dirty word. Pricing risks, appraisal and performance risks of the project. So just to give you a brief portfolio of our, a category of our assets, we have assets spread across the country. Our marquee asset is in Tuticorin in 2,500 acres. It's called the METL SEZ. We have 350 acres in the Mumbai economic zone, which is where we are developing a smart city. We have a petrochemical and economic chemical zone in Gujarat, over 780 acres, which is under sale. Already more than 400 acres have been sold there. We are developing a food park of around 125 acres, of which 60 acres is the first phase in Mirzapur. This is a 5,000-acre farm project which we are doing. We have a couple of projects in West Bengal. We are looking actively at projects in Madhya Pradesh and also in the north of the country, as well as in Hyderabad. As far as AMRL is concerned, which is located next to the Tuticorin port, it is the best-in-class port in the country now, the fourth largest and the most efficient container terminal, extremely well connected through roadways, railways, and airports, Tuticorin Airport, Trivandrum Airport, Madurai Airport, Chennai Airport, etc. Infrastructure is already in place with plug-and-play operation. A warehouse is in place for a 100-acre free trade warehousing zone is there. We have well-developed internal road networks. The electricity is already available, and we are making electricity available at extremely competitive rates through India Power, who is a private power developer. Water is already available with sewage treatment. So what are the highlights? It's an integrated smart city planned by international planners, Jurong, clear titles, there is no land risks. It's backed by Shri, which is one of India's largest infrastructure non-banking financial institutions. It's located in Tamil Nadu, one of the highest performing states. All approvals are in place, and its fast setup processes are available. Abundant availability of workforce in the region. I just wanted to highlight one SEZ here because at the end of it, it is a Global Economic Zones Conference. So this is just one of the projects which we are doing across the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. He has given you the detailed journey of the SEZ starting from 1965 to 2018. As you are aware that the objective of the SEZ that is given in Section 5 of the SEZ Act, that is basically increasing exports, increasing investment, increasing employment. And if we see from these objective criteria, as is stated, the SEZ policy was made in 2000. So at that stage, the export from the SEZ was around $2 billion. Then we incorporated SEZ policies in the foreign trade policy in the year 2000 and operated it as a part of the foreign trade policy till 2005. The exports from the SEZ in 2005, that was around 22,000 crore rupees. Then we enacted it as a part of the SEZ Act in 2005. And from 2005 onwards, if we see the exports from the SEZ last year was around 5,82,000 crore rupees. That was around $92 billion. And this year, I'm happy to inform you that till 23rd of March, the exports from SEZ has already touched 6,85,000 crore rupees. That is approximately $97.8 billion. And it might be for the first time that we might be close to $100 billion exports from SEZ. And second criteria, as I was saying about the investment, if you see investment in the SEZ, in the year 2005, when the SEZ Act was enacted, that time around it was 4,000 crore rupees only. And today, the investment in the SEZ is more than 5 lakh crore rupees, 5,02,000 crore rupees. And if you see the employment, third criteria, objective criteria, the employment in the SEZ in 2005, that was around 1,34,000 people. I'm talking about the direct employment in the SEZ. And today in the SEZ, we have got more than 2 million people working in the SEZ directly. 20 lakh people are working. So it has made significant progress in all the criteria of exports, employment, and investment. Of course, there have been challenges, as he explained, about the minimum alternative tax and other things. And we will take it forward as the discussion goes on. Now, I would request next speaker, Mr. Ranganathan Jagannathan, Deputy General Manager and Team Head Business Development, Reliance Model Economic Township Limited.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Dasgupta has already set the context on the SEZs, the challenges, the financing, etc., all from a macro perspective. Today, I am going to share you certain learnings that we have from attracting investment into our economic zone, which is located close to Delhi. So let me start with it. So what I'm going to share today is basically the investor touch points. So whenever any investor, whether domestic or overseas investor, whenever they come to invest in any area, or any state, any location, what are the things that determine their investment criteria? So broadly, we have defined it into two categories. One is the government touch points. So wherever there is an interface with the government in terms of the policies, approvals, the support systems, or the regulatory framework. So these play a very, very important role, but these by itself are not the complete criteria for any investments. The second part, which is the developer touch points, which companies like us or even the government industrial zones are there. So what do they provide on the ground? Or what are their infrastructure? What are their policies? What are their support systems? So all of this go into determining where a particular investor would put his unit. So let me go into detail on each of these things. The most important part is the ease of doing business from a macro perspective. Now, all of us have heard the ease of doing business. We have seen how India has moved up the ranks from 140 plus to 77 as of last year. But beyond the headlines, what are the components of ease of doing business and how they actually help in marketing a particular location to the investors? So these are the 11 criteria which go into the World Bank framing for the ease of doing business. The first 5 criteria, that is starting a business to dealing with construction permits, electricity, registering property, and getting credit. These deal with setting up an industry. So if you're setting up a unit, if you're setting up a business in any particular country or a location, these are the 5 touch points. Those are there which determine how easy it is or how difficult it is for somebody to set up a unit. And the next 6 points deal with the operational aspects of the business, like paying taxes or trading across borders, enforcing contracts, or if, God forbid, the business doesn't go through, what is the framework for insolvency and how do you protect the minority shareholders? So when you look at it holistically, these 11 points actually determine how easy or difficult for it is from an entire life cycle of an industry to come, function, and also to close the business. So your steady improvement in rankings on all these parameters collectively lead to your moving up the rankings, and so much better it is for the attractiveness of any particular location. So we have seen now at a very, most of the Indian states have been also following this framework, where the higher performing states, if you look at the correlation, the higher performing states in ease of doing business have a larger share in attracting both domestic and overseas businesses. Now, let me touch upon two other important points. The single window clearance system. Now, everybody, or most states today state that they do have a single window system. But in reality, the experience has been mixed with most of the investors. While some of the states have a real sense, a single window clearance, in most other states, it has still not been fine-tuned to an extent that it becomes a key differentiator. So the investor typically has to keep following up on various approvals and clearances. So this is one aspect which is very, very critical and a real differentiator. And of course, the third one is the supporting policies in terms of the investment, in terms of the both fiscal and non-fiscal incentives that are given to the industries for setting up their units. Now, I will touch upon the other important point, which is in the control of the developers. Now, this accounts for, again, a significant part of the investment criteria for investors. I'm just giving you from our examples of what we have done in our project. So we have sort of made different clusters for electronic industries, for SMEs, and for engineering industries, SMEs, etc. The primary reasoning for developing clusters is because you can develop infrastructure and services tailored to these industries. And there will be, a sharing of these industries among the different units. So this brings down, one, the cost of setting up, and also co-location of industries, and the supply chain becomes possible. The second one is, of course, the plug-and-play infrastructure. I think this goes without saying that all of us need to provide plug-and-play facilities which are inclusive of the approvals, clearances, the various infrastructure that are provided up to the boundary of the plot, or ready-built factory units that are required for companies to just bring in their machineries and start their operations. And most importantly, also, we need to look at the renewable part of it in terms of how you are bringing renewable power, how are you recycling the water, etc. For example, in our project, we are looking at about 70% of all the water gets recycled and sent back to the units for their cleaning and washroom purposes. So these are some of the aspects that need to be taken care, which are real differentiators. Apart from that, of course, you need a very good logistics network. And also, you also need a lot of commercial and residential facilities nearby. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult for you to attract industries, because if there are no units or residential facilities available for labor, then it becomes very difficult for them to commute and come to your factories. So now, give a small introduction on our project. We are part of Reliance Industries. This slide needs no much introduction. Let me just get into our project. So where are we located? We are located amongst one of the largest industrial clusters in India. That is your Gurgaon, Manesar, Bhiwadi area. So we are about 45 minutes drive from Gurgaon, half an hour from Manesar. That has been a key factor for us in attracting a lot of companies. Till date, we have signed about 90 manufacturing companies in our project. And one of the key reasons has been the location where we are located. And we are very, very close to the Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport, about 60 to 75 minutes drive from the Delhi airport. These are some of the snapshot of our project. Our two anchor industries, Panasonic and Denso. And in terms of location, connectivity, we are bang on the KMT Expressway, very well connected to two national highways, and as I mentioned, very close to Gurgaon and Manesar. Our current development, we have total about 8,000 acres of development, of which about 1,600 we have brought to development, and of which about 400 we have completed monetization, and the other 1,200 is ongoing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ranganathan. Just for the information, as you might be aware, that Reliance has got a SEZ in Jamnagar, Reliance Jamnagar, which is one of the largest refinery in the world, which we are operating in the SEZ. And the exports from the Reliance Jamnagar SEZ is approximately 1,60,000 crore rupees, which is approximately 17 to 18% of total SEZ exports of the country. He mentioned about ease of doing business, single window clearance. In the context of SEZ, I would like to inform you that we have really made an effort to get the single window system implemented and have the ease of doing operations in the SEZs. SEZs are approved. We have got single window system at 3 levels. One is at the apex level, there is a board of approval, which is chaired by the Commerce Secretary, and wherein the representatives of different ministries, CBC, CBDT, MHA, all of them are there. And any SEZ approval which is required, that is given in the board of approval. Once the SEZ is approved and the SEZ start operating, then in the SEZ, there is an approval committee meeting which is chaired by the development commissioner. For example, in Noida, I am the chairman of the approval committee meeting, wherein the local representative of the Commissioner of Customs, Income Tax, DGFT, state government representatives, they are there, and the approval is given in one go in the approval committee meeting itself. Third level of operation in the single window is supposed to be at the state level. Yes, we have the issue over there. We were expecting that when the SEZ schemes comes into operation, there would be a single window mechanism at the state level also chaired by the Chief Secretary and representative by the other secretaries of the governments. And whatever clearances are required from the state government, the representative of the state government in the approval committee meeting of the development commissioner, he takes this proposal before the single window clearance of the state government, gets the approval from there, communicate in the approval committee meeting. That is not really happening. So third component of the single window in the context of SEZ, that has not worked. Of course, in Gujarat, it was implemented. There they had this kind of single window mechanism. They have it, and some more states have implemented. But this is one component which we would like to be functioning more effectively. Of course, some of the state governments, they have delegated the powers to the development commissioner. For example, in UP, the power of the labor commissioner that have been delegated to the development commissioner. Similarly, Haryana government, the power of approval of the building plans, that has been delegated to the approval committee meetings. Similarly, the SEZs have been declared as the public utility services. So some of the components that have been delegated, so that also helps in operating. Also, you talked about plug and play facility and about the small units. I would specifically like to tell that you see SEZs is something wherein an investor, when it is coming, specifically the small investor, he can come straightway start their operation. If you go outside SEZ, if you have to acquire the space, you look for these rentals or whatever you acquire, that takes a lot of time and a lot of clearances. Whereas in the SEZ, you get a developed infrastructure, you straightway go, make the application, get the approval in the approval committee meeting, and start your operations. There are two kind of things. For example, in Noida, we have got the plots, developed plots which are given to the units. We have got the SDF, Standard Design Factory, which are developed by the zone itself. It's a 4-floored building, and on every floor, there are 4 units of 500 square meter each. So a small person who comes, small investor, straightway gets the approval, gets the SDF allotted. It's a 500 square meter space. Go and straightway start operating, electricity, security, everything is there. So SEZ does help that way in ease of doing operations as well as single window mechanisms. You also talked about logistics. For taking care of that kind of things also, the SEZ scheme also have a component of free trade warehousing zone. And we have got free trade warehousing zone operating in Panvel. We have got one operating in Arsia. We have got one operating in Chennai also. So that is for the purpose of logistics. And duty calling also, yes. So now I would request the next speaker, Mr. Rohit Kapur, Managing Director, Shira and Associates, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the organizers for this opportunity to address you this morning. I'm going to be speaking briefly about the SEZ experiences in China and in comparison to what India has been doing. First, we take a look at the growing Chinese interest in investing and coming into India. As you will see from this chart that till today, approximately $12 billion have been invested by Chinese enterprises in India. by about 700 active companies who are operating in the sectors like real estate, electronics, renewable energy, textiles, automotive, e-commerce. And the most prominent states in which they're operating are Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, and UP. This trend is expected to gain traction over a period of time because with growing costs in China and demographic penalties that they're now facing with an aging population, they're looking to countries like India, where there is a large population of young people available to man factories at significantly lower costs as compared to their own costs in China. And India is well positioned to offer these advantages to Chinese manufacturing enterprises. What is India's role in the China Plus One strategy? One is, of course, market size. China and India are similar in terms of large rural populations with low per capita income. China understands the challenges such a market presents. You know, it's very difficult for Western countries to understand how to price their products for markets like India. China has been a very significant player in this field considering their own domestic challenges. Availability of labor is the second factor. India has a large population of young persons of employable age who can man large manufacturing facilities at lower costs as compared to China. Stable environment. India provides a stable political and policy environment for Chinese firms to do business in India. And of course, availability of land. Land is available at low or competitive rates for large manufacturing projects, though acquisition of land has been a contentious issue, particularly in terms of acquiring land at pricing, which may or may not be conducive to the farmers who want to give up the land. These are some examples of Chinese companies who are already present in India. You can see the range of investment ranging from $50 million to $1 billion. And this is expected to grow, as I said. This is a more detailed list with the years in which these companies came in. And the Chinese experience in high volume manufacturing and marketing low-cost, high-technology products in their home market has served them well in meeting the challenges posed by the Indian market. So they are well equipped to address the challenges the Indian market might present to them. So let's look at the Chinese experience on special economic zones. China's SEZs came up along the country's southern and eastern coastal cities of Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, Xiamen, Hainan in the 80s. The objective was to promote labor-intensive, high-volume manufacturing to cater to both local and export markets. The combination of favorable policies and the right mix of production factors in the SEZs resulted in high rates of economic growth in China. That's when China really took off and never really looked back after that. In effect, these special economic zones proved to be capitalist havens in communist China. Smaller zones came up in the hinterland in proximity to these existing 6 major special economic zones. These were 14 open coastal cities, 4 pilot free trade areas, 5 financial reform pilot FTAs, 31 bonded areas. So there was a rash of these smaller areas which came up in the hinterland to support and to actually take forward the SEZ experience. So what did the Chinese do differently? We all know the China story, the way they've been growing and actually captured the world market in terms of export of produce. So what did they do differently to really achieve this level of manufacturing and economic growth? They implemented daring new innovative policies that ran counter to the communist ethos. They deliberately located SEZs far away from the center of political power in Beijing to eliminate political interference. They created a competitive environment between zones by empowering them to set their own SEZ policies. Local administrations were given a free hand in investment, pricing, taxation, housing, labor, and land management policies. They encouraged competition between SEZs to attract new investment and ensure conducive environment for industries setting up in the SEZs. These were strategically located next to seaports and airports, close proximity to Hong Kong, which is the financial hub of Asia, invested in high-class infrastructure, road rail links to the hinterland and the seaports and airports, uninterrupted supply of high-quality power and water, and warehousing facilities of world-class nature. Encouraged FDI in high-technology sectors to raise the manufacturing and technical capabilities of Chinese industry. And they set clear goals and benchmarks for growth and vigorously monitored the achievements of each SEZs. The Chinese government was very, very rigid about this. They gave all the freedom, but they demanded results from these SEZs, and they monitored this very closely. They encouraged SEZ units to manufacture for domestic markets to meet the rapidly growing consumption demand of the Chinese economy. So the SEZs offered many economic incentives to investors, such as considerably lower corporate tax than domestic peers, tax holidays even for sales in domestic markets, ability to repatriate profits, duty-free imports for use in exports, flexibility in hiring and firing workers, rapid customs clearance were among some of the features and incentives and benefits which were extended to manufacturing industries set up in the SEZs. Looking at the Indian experience, till 2000, India did not have SEZs and instead had a number of export processing zones. Government introduced SEZs in April of 2000. As of January 2019, 231 SEZs are in operation and 421 have received formal approval for operation. Around 60% of these SEZs are IT and IT-enabled services. Small percentage of operating SEZs in the country are into multi-product manufacturing units. India's SEZ policy is directed towards promoting exports, and tax exemptions are export-focused. So some advantages of setting up an entity with an Indian SEZ are duty-free import of goods, exemption from GST and other levies on local purchasing, 100% income tax exemption on export income for the first 5 years, 50% income tax exemption for the next 5 years, and for the next 5 years thereafter, exemption up to 50% of the export profits reinvested in the business for the next 5 years, subject to specific conditions. Of course, we know now that all these are subject to sunset clause, which are going to kick in 2020. The area of land determines the type of SEZ in India. Multi-sector SEZ require a minimum of 1,000 hectares of land. Sector-specific SEZs require a minimum of 100 acres. And IT, ITS, gems and jewelry SEZs require a minimum of 10 hectares. On the right-hand side, we can see a long list of states and the distribution of SEZs, these 421, and the sectors in which they have come. And you can see the prominent is 275 in the IT and ITES sector, which is skewed more towards the software and the IT side and less towards the manufacturing side. So when you compare India and China, what do you see? One is size. Mostly mega SEZs, typically running into thousands of hectares. Hainan, an entire province in China, is in a special economic zone. In India, it's, as we have seen, a considerably smaller in scale. Location. In China, they're located mostly near coasts to facilitate efficient import-export of goods. There was no such strategic location or specific planning policy. Land was acquired anywhere where it was decided to do. Labor laws were very relaxed in the SEZs in China. In India, labor laws continue to be applicable, of course, but there were limited relaxations in terms of bureaucratic inspections. They were exempted from being exempted for a first initial period of time. But beyond that, the Indian labor laws were applicable within the SEZs. Tax incentives in China were FDI focused to encourage manufacturing for domestic and export markets. In India, they were export focused. Uncertainty in continuity of tax benefits since sunset clause is going to kick in 2020. Infrastructure. Superior connectivity through road and rail links, proximity to sea and airports, availability of warehouses, adequate supply of power and water, well-maintained infrastructure. When the SEZs were set up in India, there was poor road and rail connectivity to sea and airports, absence of secure warehousing, poor supply of power and water, poor maintenance of infrastructure. Availability of land in China, all land belonged to the government. So it was easy for the government to earmark land and to pass it on to manufacturers for the purposes of development. In India, land is essentially owned privately. So there was a lack of government will basically to negotiate and settle acquisition pricing, which led to bottlenecks. With the advent of private players in the SEZ space, this has become a little better because they have been independently negotiating pricing on purely commercial considerations and have been able to acquire land in order to develop the SEZs. The development of the SEZs itself in China was government-driven. It was as per a blueprint laid down by the local government administrators, and they implemented it as per the guidelines which were laid down in their own policy framework. Earlier in India, it was government-driven. Now, private players are also permitted to set up SEZs. So it's a combination effort from both the government and private players in India. Dominant sector for SEZs in China were multi-sector manufacturing. In India, almost 60% of SEZs are IT and IT-enabled services, and some percentages in the multi-sector manufacturing. So there's obviously a need for an overhaul of India's SEZ policy. This chart that you see on the screen is a very telling chart. India's share, manufacturing share in GDP has been slipping right from 19+% to less than 17% in a span of 2011-12 to 2016-17. This dramatic drop in terms of percentages is over 2%, but it is huge. Contribution from the manufacturing sector has been declining in past few years. The Make in India initiative was launched with an objective to arrest this declining trend, increase the share of manufacturing in India's GDP to 25% by 2022 in order to meet the rising consumption needs of the Indian population and create 100 million additional jobs. Now, it's very evident this cannot happen by 2022. We are in 2019. The government's plan of getting GDP, manufacturing share in GDP to 25% by 2022 in a mere 3 years is simply not possible. So there is a real need for a renewed effort on the part of all stakeholders to get this manufacturing up. And now, what is the case for this? In 2007, the McKinsey Global Institute released a report which said that the earning, purchasing, and consuming middle class of India will be 583 million people by 2025-26. The government got the National Council for Applied Economic Research to verify this report, and they came back and said more or less the same thing. They said this number will be around 547 million people. Income is expected to triple by 2025. The per capita annual disposable income is expected to grow from $1,750 in 2005 to $4,900 by 2025. We will be the third largest consumer market in the world by 2025. Consumption is expected to be $4 trillion by 2025. Just visualize this. 547 million toothbrushes, toothpastes, shirts, trousers, whatever else. Where is it going to come from? With manufacturing slipping the way it has, there is an urgent need to relook at the SEZ policy, take into account the Baba Kalyani report, who suggested look at China as one of the examples of success and implement policies which encourage manufacturing in India. So this is really what I had to say, and we operate, basically we're a Hong Kong-based practice. We facilitate companies across the world who want to come into Asia and establish a presence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kapur. It was very informative. You compare the SEZs in China and India. You see, when we were planning our SEZ policy, we had our own model. Of course, we were aware what is the land size over there, but then keeping in mind the Indian circumstances and how the land is to be acquired over here, we had our policy. And for the multi-product SEZ, you mentioned that the area requirement is 1,000 hectares. Yes, initially it was 1,000 hectares, but keeping in mind our experience, we have changed it now. Now the minimum area required for multi-product SEZ is 500 hectares. Similarly, for the sector-specific SEZ, you mentioned the area requirement 100 hectares. That was there, but now the minimum area required is 50 hectares. And for the IT sector, you mentioned about 10 hectares. Yes, we had kept it 10 hectares, but then we have changed it now. And now there is no minimum area requirement for setting up a IT sector SEZ. What is required is that there should be a minimum built-up area of 1 lakh square meters. That is approximately 1 million square feet. That is the minimum area, built-up area required. There again, our policy is a dynamic policy, and we have been carrying out changes depending upon our requirement. We want to take IT sector to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So keeping in mind that aspect, now what we have stated that if it's a tier A city, then minimum area requirement is 1 lakh square meters. For tier 2 cities, it is 50,000 square meters. And for tier 3 cities, the minimum built-up area required is only 25,000 square meters. And this has paid rich dividends. If you see, as you rightly mentioned that a lot of investment is coming in the IT sector SEZ, out of total exports of around 6,85,000 crore rupees from the SEZ, around $97 billion, the exports from the IT sector is around 53%. So that's a matter of pride, and now the entire new investment in the IT sector is coming in the SEZs. That is what we have been realizing on the field. And you also mentioned about encouraging manufacturing sector SEZs. Yes, that is an area of concern, that we need to encourage more manufacturing. We need to take steps for encouraging manufacturing in the SEZs. Baba Kalyani committee was set up by Department of Commerce, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and the committee had submitted its reports. The report is under consideration. I'm sure necessary steps would be taken on that. Now I would request our next speaker, Dr. Arpita Mukherjee, to please speak, Professor of the ICRIER.
A very good morning to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to speak in this event before an August audience. I must confess that Mr. Singhal has been one of my gurus, teaching me about SEZ. But sometimes, you know, the student can be a disobedient student. So I'm a disobedient student of you, Mr. Singhal, and I think I would present the right case. You are in a globalized world, okay? You are trading in a globalized world where technology is taking over, and you are talking about automation, startup as a part of your government policy. Digitalization, automation, startup, these are all your government policies, demonetization, everything. Everything related to technology. And here you are measuring a unit based on how many employment it creates. We have to modernize ourselves and look at other countries which are taking over us, like Vietnam or Cambodia or Japan. Japan, for the matter, has set up SEZs, where SEZ as a concept is totally delinked with the WTO concept. WTO says that if you give a subsidy to a manufacturing sector, industry-based, regional-based, it is actionable. Based on foreign exchange earning, it is prohibited. India falls under the prohibited subsidy category. So if there is one intelligent manufacturer, he is not going to set up unit in SEZ until we have a clear policy about how we should handle it. Definitely for the global companies, they are not going to come to India if you tell that your incentive is linked to net foreign exchange earning. And what is net foreign exchange earning? It can be 1 rupee. If I have a high input manufacturing and then I export, what is my real value addition? I can create a total value between my domestic market and my SEZ. Now here, when I come to look into the Indian SEZ and look into foreign companies in Indian SEZ, they say post RCEP it is easy for me to sell from Vietnam, Cambodia and China into the Indian market rather than setting up into an SEZ, because there will be 85-90% reduction in tariff lines. And I am very saddened to see that your research of the Commerce Ministry did not highlight that this ministry is going to sign an RCEP agreement where there will be significant tariff reduction. The whole of this country will be competing with China. And in that context, our poor SEZs are not able to sell to their domestic market. So that is something, at least you should treat your homegrown baby, give it the level playing field. And the whole level playing field has been missing in the Commerce Ministry ever since SEZ was created. Let us go back to the foreign trade policy, which looks into SEZ. After the Big Bang announcement of the SEZ, we come out with a policy of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 benefit. And we give both these benefits to the DTA and not to the SEZ. So why would you treat a zone that you create as your most, kind of stepchildren? I tell SEZ for India, for the Commerce Ministry, is Ram for Kaikai. Banish it. Apply mat, banish it. We have to be very, very strong in how we deal with our SEZ. Come out with a good package. Till now, I have not seen the industry or definitely the government or any study to come out with an alternative package. We have given this alternative package 3 years ago. We have said 3 years ago that please give SEZ the level playing field of FTA partners. Why have that not been reflected in the next study of the Commerce Ministry? We have told 3 years ago, give the SEZ a kind of non-fiscal incentives which is not given to the rest of the country. Give them specialized treatment. You have a startup, you are giving incentive under startup scheme. How do you draw those startups into SEZs for their globalization drive? Indian companies want to globalize, and SEZ would be a good model to globalize, but if they're outside SEZ, they get more incentive. Now, when you look at the SEZs, please look into it from two aspects: developer and the user. The developer is falling under development, real estate development, and it can be subsidized because there is yet to be a discipline developing subsidies in services. So if you are talking about goods and services, please delink to the good and services. Give the input subsidies and subsidies in services. That it in itself will not make it, questionable in the WTO, or even if it is questionable, it is argumentative and everybody is getting it. Now, we are comparing between China and India in terms of the size of the SEZ, in the policy, but the biggest thing was China was giving a very low corporate tax. In India, the corporate tax is high. Third thing is that unless you bring down the corporate tax to a 25%, nobody will come. SEZ people come in SEZ to grow and expand. It is a fast-growing model. In a fast-growing model, if you have a discriminatory tax structure where you will pay higher tax if you grow, it is better for me to remain SME. SEZ is not a model for SME, and export is not a model for SME. Export is a model which allows SMEs to grow. So, therefore, we are somewhere mixed up in the concept. Now, when Commerce Ministry gave me this study, they also told me, find out how many subsidies are given in this country. We counted up to 300 and stopped. Now, if you give 300 odd subsidies, look at central government, state government, look at within the Commerce Ministry. Within the Commerce Ministry, you have Agri Export Zone and SEZ. If you have so many different type of subsidies and packages, most of the time I think, and most of my bigger players, industries that I interview, top industries, and ask them, why are you going to Thailand? They said, we get so confused which subsidy to take that we go to Thailand. So this is again a big problem. If you give them too many things, how will India industry choose between what to take and what to reject? So the subsidies regime has to be aligned to it is called pruning down the subsidy. And we did have a discussion what Vietnam did and what Japan did. They did nothing, but they pruned down the subsidies to something like 50 to 100, which is givable, which is monitorable, which is not a cost to the Indians as a taxpayer. Because if you give so many subsidies, it can be cost to me as a taxpayer as well. And there will be issues like grand land grab, this, that, which SEZ face. About operational SEZ, we do not need more SEZs in the country. And one of our suggestions was that we do not need 400, 500, 600. We have more, we have one of the largest numbers. What we need is to make the existing numbers operational. And the developers also need to think in that light that I have to make my numbers operational. And operational doesn't mean that I need to have one unit in I need to fully occupy my SEZ. And in China, if we look into the China model, it is like that, that they have to fully occupy the SEZ. Then they move into the next scheme. And when China began it, they used the SEZ as a test bed for reform. In India, we should use it as a test bed for reform. In many cases, there are questions whether I can do this reform or I cannot do this reform. For example, can I open legal services to corporate law practice? It is a very, very sensitive topic, given that many of our ministers are lawyers themselves. So, but can we try it? Can we try it in Gujarat GIFT? Now that brings us to the location of GIFT. When you're looking into a financial sector SEZ, would you really locate it in Gujarat or Bombay? If you had located it in Bombay, it would have been successful. It would not be successful in Gujarat. So therefore, the location point is very, very important for the SEZs. And you know, SEZs are in India mostly emotionally created. Like, you know, I want to do this SEZ in this zone. But that is, there can be 3-4 reasons for that. Maybe I get a easier land in this zone. But if I do not put my connectivity and structures in place, and if I am not able to access the port, my SEZ will not work. Let me tell you about the China, in the one of the best of your FTWZ in Chennai. In the Chennai port, the Food Safety Authority's office is located. The FTWZ is located 30 kilometers out of the port. So when the consignment comes, it goes to the FTWZ. The Food Safety Authority takes out a printout because our law says upon arrival of the consignment. They are not doing pre-shipment clearance, whereas custom ice gate is doing pre-shipment clearance. So custom ice gate is not integrated. It is not integrated with your courier ice gate also, courier mode also, whatever they use, Swift or something. Then they carry it 30 kilometers, then they write it down, then they carry it back 30 kilometers. When they asked for a solution on ranking ease of doing business, the only advice that we gave was to carry a tablet and upload it online. You know, this is a very simple thing. Pre-shipment clearances will be done. Tablets will be uploading information online. Courier mode says no perishable. Now, if there is no perishable, how can you do medical testing, clinical testing, bioinformative in SEZ? Courier was created in 2010 because at that time their airport did not have infrastructure, so they said no perishable. So what has happened is Bombay Customs stopped perishable, Delhi is allowing it. So everybody is reading regulations as they want. It is a thorough investigation of your regulations. Thoroughly, you have to sit and match up all the regulations across different committees that are created by the Department of Commerce, come out with a holistic policy. And if you do not come out with a holistic policy, one of the biggest problems, I think Indian industry are excellent that they are operating in SEZ. I took 3 months to only read and understand the notifications. And there may be over 100 notifications to an act. If the act and its amendments and its rules are clear, why in a year you have to come 15 explanations explaining the act? And last but not the least, the power SEZ. Power SEZ is one of the most funniest SEZ that I have seen in India, that in that you generate a power, then you cannot link it to the state distribution. Secondly, if you generate the power, the cost of the power is high in states like Gujarat, where the power is cheap and all the time 24/7 available. So, you know, we need to really rethink the policies, come out with a holistic plan, and this is a good effort by the industry and the government that they are organizing this event. But I would really say, please do not go and write a mail that we create employment, we create jobs, we are doing skilling. That is not your job. Your job is to do exports, create high-value manufacturing, lead the country there. Everything else will fall in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arpita. She has made very valuable suggestions and very valid points. She mentioned about subsidy, that India cannot give subsidy, specifically direct tax subsidy, the income tax exemptions. Yes, that has been, we are aware of that. And what has happened that you might be aware that the income tax exemption which was available to the SJ developer, that has been discontinued from March 2017. And in respect of the exporters also, it has been pointed out that the sunset clause has been brought in, that now it will be available only for the new units which start operations till March 2020, and it will not be available after the unit comes into operation from March 2020. Export-linked income tax exemption will not be there. Now, what would be the alternative to that? Whether there would be any alternative to that, that will be, the view will be taken by the Government of India. Baba Kalyani Committee had suggested certain alternatives, whether it could be linked with the investment, whether it could be linked with the employment. So that view will be taken depending upon all these factors. She also mentioned a very valid issue about sale of goods from SEZ to domestic tariff area, that when the goods are being sold from SEZ to DTA, then they are subjected to full duty on the finished product, whereas the FTA duties, etc., are zero duties. Now, that is also one point which is a very valid issue, which is under consideration for quite some time between Department of Commerce and Department of Revenue. One of the suggestions which have been given is that instead of imposing duty on the finished product, can we have the duty on the duty foregone basis? That is, whatever duty has been foregone on the inputs used, that the same should be recovered rather than imposing duty on the finished product. That system in the EOUs, export-oriented unit scheme, has been implemented last year. Earlier, EOUs also, when they were selling their goods, they were subjected to full duty on the finished product. Now they are required to pay duty on the inputs only. So whether the same thing could be done in the SEZ, that is under examination, but the point is very valid. And I'm sure other suggestions also which you have given, when the new government takes and then Baba Kalyani Committee is under consideration, other issues also would be taken into consideration, and let's see what view is taken. Now I would request our next speaker, Mr. Hitender Mehta, to please come.
Good morning, sir. Our chairman, Dr. L.B. Singhal, other distinguished panelists, Shri D.S. Rawatji, Babulal Jainji, Mr. Behel. It's indeed pleasure to be here, being with all of you. I've been actually emotionally attached with this subject for last, I think, 12 years. In 2007, I wrote a 1,500 pages book on special economic zones, and ever since, I've stuck to this subject. I mean, the story has been very encouraging, the SEZ story, but at the same time, I would concur with views, some of the views expressed by Dr. Arpita Mukherjee also, because I don't know what has been the reason. The SEZ, I mean, they were caught on wrong foot by maybe by the Ministry of Finance, or maybe they thought that we are losing lots of revenue in terms of taxes that the government could have earned from these SEZs. See how it happened that in 2005, the Parliament considered it appropriate to legislate this SEZ Act. And from 2006, 10 February 2006 precisely, they make this act operational. And as Dr. Singhal said, that there has been considerable growth in exports since then. From 22,000 crores to we have reached to 681,000 crores till yesterday, as Dr. Singhal said. This is actually an indication of a kind of success that these SEZs have achieved. But at the same time, when this story continues and it has tremendous potential, like from 2006-07, like it actually defied the global, this slowdown period also. It continued to grow until 2010, I must say. And then came the discussions about the direct taxes code, and then there was some indications that policy relating to tax is going to be changed, or MAT and DDT are going to be withdrawn. And that actually sent some signals or some shivers to the investors in SEZs that this policy is not a stable policy. So that was only an indication. But having said that, I think tax is one of the major drivers why a businessman would come into a special economic zone. There are many other incentives which are available, and those were promised in the Special Economic Zone Act itself. Because any investor would like to get into a place which has a stable policy framework, which has a legislation that gives tremendous credibility to the investor. So having kicked off nicely until 2011 when this MAT and DDT thing came, and there has been constant opposition. I mean, this is there in media from Ministry of Finance. I mean, I don't know what has been the reason. So once you decide to change a policy, you change it. Like the way it has been done in the case of sunset clause, well in advance, all stakeholders have been informed, and till 2020, if any unit becomes operational, so they can come and start their operation and avail the tax holiday. So that is a very welcome thing that government has done, because they actually informed it 3-4 years in advance. So everybody can plan their affairs accordingly. But then, when I was talking about this MAT, this incentive scheme is provided in the SEZ Act. There is Section 26, which provides you, tax benefits, or it was service tax also, central sales tax also, and central excise also, and many other benefits which are provided in the Act. And there was a schedule in the SEZ Act. So government, like Ministry of Commerce is the governing ministry. Now, because I am from the legal background, so I'll just give you some aspect like why this SEZ has been getting a kind of stepmotherly treatment. The ideal thing would have been that you first change the SEZ Act, and then the message goes to everybody that now policy for SEZ is being changed, and this is the change. So what happens that government make a change in the Income Tax Act, and then through that, we are doing a backdoor amendment in the SEZ Act. Actually, both acts should have been amended simultaneously. Surprisingly, there has not been a single amendment in the SEZ Act since 2005 when it was enacted. There have been amendment rules, of course. I'm talking of SEZ Act, which contains the substantive provisions. And till today, in the SEZ Act, there is no mention of GST. So whatever GST benefit are being extended to SEZ, these are by way of notification under the GST laws, and which we have captured in our rules only in 2018, September 2018, basically. What we try to say, there is Rule 31 and 32 in the SEZ rules, so that provides benefits like service tax and central sales tax. Those two rules have been omitted from 19 September 2018. Ideally, from a legal perspective, these should have been amended retrospectively from the date of introduction of GST, because GST is there since 1st July 2017, but these rules have been omitted only from 19 September 2018, meaning thereby in the SEZ framework also, that mention of GST is not there till that time. And it continues to capture the provision relating to service tax, central sales tax, and central excise, for example. So the Ministry of Commerce, I think they should have considered all those changes in one go and introduced an amendment, but I think this is a long-drawn process. But then there have been many other cases like Companies Act, which has been amended 2013, it was introduced, and there have been many amendments since then. So this act also can be amended. But now coming back, what figures which Dr. Singhal told you, that 6,81,000 crore, that has been achieved only by 232 operational SEZs. Only 232 operational SEZs. So we have today 416 approvals, formal approvals, as on 26 March 2019. Out of 416, we have 370 notified SEZ. And out of this 370, 351 are the private sector, 7 are central government, and 12 are state government SEZs. So just imagine if 232 SEZ can achieve almost 100 billion turnover. So if we can make another 100 or maybe another 200, the remaining SEZ operational, what would be the contour? What would be the size of employment they will be generating, the kind of infrastructure that will be generated? So around 5 lakh crore have been invested in these SEZs since this SEZ Act came. But in last 4-5 years, there has not been significant investment, sir. So this 500 crore is still a particular period, and after that there is a visible slowdown in the investment in SEZs. So I think it is high time that government must consider, I think Baba Kalyani committee is already there, whether to discontinue this policy and introduce a new policy instead of this, and let these SEZs complete their maybe tax holiday scheme, or if they want to continue with other benefits of indirect taxes, they can continue. But GST, I'm afraid, one fine day, some finance ministry official, he thinks that GST should not be, benefit should not be given, so they can actually issue a notification, because your act does not provide, and they are providing by way of some notification. So if we don't do these things, we will be continuing to be losing these opportunities of creating big infrastructure, inviting massive foreign investment to neighboring countries like China, like Middle East, or Southeast Asian countries. So I think there is nothing much that I have to add at this stage. So other questions we can take in the panel. I'll close my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hitender. And I remember when he wrote a book, then in 2007, then he came to me that, please do write a foreword to the book. And I was so happy to write a foreword for this book. He has been working on the SEZ since then. He mentioned about MAT in 2011. Yes, I admit that that was one decision which has impacted the growth of SEZ like anything. In 2005, as I stated, our exports from the SEZ was around $5 billion. And in 2011, it was $87 billion. You see, from 2005 to 2011, we went from $5 billion to $87 billion. And from 2011, in 18-19, we are talking about just $100 billion. Maybe if that intervention would not have come, we would have been talking to crossing $200 billion, the way it was growing. And MAT is what? It's a kind of advanced tax. In any case, the unit, whenever it has to pay, it will pay the tax. So that is one decision which has certainly impacted the growth of the SEZ in a big way. In fact, that figure of $87 billion which we achieved in 11-12, we were able to cross that only last year. In dollar terms, we went up to $92 billion. So that shows, just imagine, $5 billion in 2005 to 87 in 2011, and then we are talking about $100 billion in 18-19. So yes, that was one major thing. And now I would request our last speaker, Mr. B.K. Panda, Zonal Development Commissioner, Falta Special Economic Zone, please.
Dr. Singhal, the panelists, and all the delegates of the conference, very good morning to all of you. Many of the points which I intended to tell already, my earlier speakers already touched upon those points. I'll just tell how the trade moves, and the trade or the industry, whatever you say, it all depends upon it is because of different level of development in different countries. And as you all know, these are all revolving around the 4 M's: the men, the skilled manpower; machines, the technology; money, the fund; and the material, that is the mineral resources and the other minerals. It all depends how they are placed in a country, because the country is governed by government, and that is the administrative artificial boundary. And going to various level of development of these 4 M's, the trade takes place. In the past, if we look at our past, our history, we were very good in metallurgical manufacturing, iron, zinc, all the history says, and the scientists also, they have already acknowledged there was an export from India to the European countries. Today, what we say that European countries, the most developed in technology, but technology was more developed in India. That's how the trade was there from India to the European countries. The use, steel, and all, I will not go into detail because the time is very short. It all depends how we had the trade in our past. We were very advanced in steel manufacturing, zinc manufacturing, and then, of course, the spice and silk. And that's how we were having the trade, foreign trade, and the exports were more higher than the imports. And the resources were very, very resourceful. We have mineral resources. We have all manpower, skilled manpower earlier. And that's how India was called the Chidia, golden peacock, that is Sone ke Chidia. And if you see the Kalingas, they were very, the king of seas. They used to trade of the Southeast Asian countries. And many of the Southeast Asian countries, the islands, they are named after the cities and towns and rivers of the Odisha, present-day Odisha, that is Kalinga. And later on, during this later period of 7th to 8th century, the Rajendra from the Chola dynasty, they also dominated the trade in the Southeast Asian countries and to Malaysia, Burma, and Japan and all. But it didn't stop. It didn't similarly, from Gujarat, from 65, 80 onwards, the trades were there from the west to the Western countries, Persia and all. And this was the Silk Route, and how India was very, very dominant, and including the China, the routes, if you see, and we were very, very prominent in the foreign trade. But what happened? Why we had lost? Because of this dark age, we call it, during the, we'll say, 1100, 1200 AD onwards, the science and technology couldn't develop in our country, and the storehouse of our science and technology, which were confined to the temples, they were destroyed, and the country was engaged in dance and drama and not in technology. As a result, and at the same time, Europe had seen the most development, industrial development, and owing to which the technology, which we had the technology, there was a big jump in the technology. As a result, they are the superior in technology. So the technology we have to now import. So we are importing and paying through our nose for the space science, your aeroplane, or all the high technical goods. And during the British period, we had seen that they have planned way, they have stopped the trade or the development or the manufacturing in the country. They wanted to take the raw material from our country and manufacture there and send it back to our country. That was the trade. And many of the states, including the mineral-rich states like Jharkhand, Odisha, and all those things, they had the policy. They had not changed the policy till last 2 years. They were exporting the minerals from our country. But luckily, for the last 2 years, government of Odisha has taken a view that no raw material will not be exported, and there will be only the finished goods of the raw material should be exported. So this has changed, and some manufacturing units have come to the state, that country, and that's how it is having more export of the products, steel products, manufactured products. Since this time is very short, I'll just conclude. I'll not but go into detail of the PPT. The thing is that today we are rich in technology. I told you we are revolving around the 4 M's. Our manpower, as we are saying, we are having 120 crores people in our country, and most of them are in the age of the 25% of the total population are at the age of 25, 22, 30. That is very young people, energetic, and the country, the government is trying to have this Make in India and also upgrade the skill by the Skill India program and giving training. And most of the units we have found in the SCZs and all elsewhere, we have found the manpower requirement is not so high. It is required only ITI level of skill is required, which is lacking in our country. Now, government is trying to impart training at this level, that 10th pass students, giving the ITI level students who can do the work. And in the service sector, India is leading, and as we from the West East zone, in my zone, I will say that the service sector, it has now 22% jump from the last year, and in merchandise, it has jumped 37% in the, our east and northeast zones. There are about 12 SCZs in my zone, and the 37% is only for the last year. So there are about 271 units who were working in Falta SCZ, only 65 are now working. This is because of many reasons, as all my predecessors have already spoken, the constraints of SCZs. But still then, we have achieved 37%. And you see, if you look at the employment scenario, say 70,000 employees are there in the service sector, and 20,000 people are there, employees are there in the merchandise. Whereas the merchandise, we have achieved 13,000 crore, and in service sector, 16,000 crore. If you compare the employability in the service sector, it is quite high. It is almost 3 times. That means we are better in the skilled manpower because of the IT SEZs, and we should encourage those things. I never mind that we should also concentrate on the merchandise, the manufacturing sector, but if you look at the employability, the total employment, it's not so comparable with the services. So we have to have a balance between two, and we should not be very complacent that we have achieved 14% in dollar terms compared to last year in the whole of the SEZs, and which counts to 25% of the total exports. But still, the rules, the single window system has to be a little more streamlined, and the incentives, what even though WTO, they are pressing, it is only in their interest to stop the incentives. The government is considering giving the incentives, keeping the employability and foreign exchange both together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Panda. Now we have concluded with our speakers. We started this session late at 10:15, so I think we can take questions for around 10 minutes or so. I would request if there are any questions, please introduce yourself and also point out the name of the speaker to whom the question is intended to. It is open. If there is no question from the audience, then probably we can conclude this session. Okay.
Thank you to all of our panelists. What an invigorating session it's been. I now invite our esteemed chair to felicitate the speakers. Mr. Indranil Dasgupta. Mr. Ranganathan Jagannathan. Mr. Rohit Kapur. Dr. Arpita Mukherjee. Mr. Hitender Mehta. And Shri B.K. Panda. I'd now like to call upon the Exhibitions India Group Chairman, Mr. Prem Behal, to award a token of our appreciation to the esteemed chair.
Just a few words before I thank you and appreciate your contribution here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I thought this was a very comprehensive discussion or a delivery with regard to the economic zones in our country. I think we got a good perception on what is available, what should be done or could be done, a little bit of a comparison between India and China. While I always say that comparisons are somewhat not necessary, but in this case I think it may have been necessary to do so because they have actually shown a success rate as far as the growth of exports are concerned. But you know, I actually want to expand a little bit on the little point that I tried to make yesterday, and for want of time, I did not do so. My whole point about development zones, and not just call them economic development zones, but any kind of a zone, it need not necessarily be in terms of a large tract of land. And then you say that I can do a single vertical or a multiple product activity. I actually would like to say that look at it from a holistic countrywide point of view. And the most important part of any kind of economic development would essentially be the ease of setting up a business and operating a business. So it need not necessarily be in a enclave or in a locale where you turn around and say that, look, I need to create employment opportunities for X number of people. The globe today is suffering from one irreversible migration to cities. Now, look at the socio-impact of people who transfer themselves as single people, either a boy or a girl, a male or a female, from the natural locale that they live to go and work in another environment. Now you disrupt a complete family system. And China actually is suffering from that. But China has a means of being able to use an autocratic system to tell a young boy or a young girl migrating from one location to a city in search of employment that, look, you have to go back twice a year to visit your parent. So they make it conditional and compulsory to do so. In our environment, we see large cities and we see the socio-economic impact of individuals who've migrated from Bihar or a UP to a state like or a city like Maharashtra. So think about the fact that if an economic environment had been created somewhere else or in that locale for that particular person, the quality of life might have been better. And they can still contribute to all your parameters of employment, your economic development, your exports as well. So I personally would like to see this in a more holistic way, rather than in an enclave or a conclave kind of a way. Having said that, thank you very much for a very articulate session, extremely informative. And the manner in which you've conducted it is, I would think, exemplary. We were late, yet we maintained a strict quorum about how to set the process going, and I'd like to thank you for that. Thank you.